Hello, welcome to another edition of Curtis Jones Writing. Uh, if you recall, I've been reading each chapter out of all my books. I've read all of chapter of Dad's Old Truck Volume 1. I've started on Dad's Old Truck Volume 2, and I'm up to chapter 11, which is a pretty large chapter. It runs about 62 pages long. So it'll probably come in either two or three installments so that I could get through it without spending an hour and a half on it or whatever. Because I read slower so that I can enunciate my words better. So uh, if you like what I'm doing, you could like and subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends, like it will help Facebook or Amazon. YouTube like to keep me on here. Uh, Share it with your friends. All of the stories that I write and talk about and read are uh, acceptable in mixed company with children. And in fact, I think children would enjoy the stories quite well. Dad's Old Truck 1 and 2 are stories about my childhood growing up to about 17 years old, maybe 18, I don't know, because I got married at 18. I accidentally got in the Navy at a very early age. We'll talk about that. It's in another chapter as we go. Uh, so I want to get started now, and that way we can at least get the first half of chapter 11 in. Chapter 11 is entitled 60 Hard Hours. It got that title because when I was 16, a friend of mine in the school I was going was having problems with between him and his father, and he wanted to run away from home. And he asked me if I would go with him, and I agreed. I wasn't really thinking about running away from home, but it just sounded like a wonderful adventure, and I talk about that in this chapter. So I hope you enjoy it. If you do, tell your friends about it. 60 Hard Hours, Chapter 11 from Dad's Old Truck, Volume 2. I was quite happy going to school in California at Modesto High School. And in February, my father got a call from my Uncle John. Uncle John's little farm near Stillwell, Oklahoma, was about to be repossessed by the bank. This plot of land had been in the Johnson family for 3 generations. Uncle John did not want to see it to go to any other family members other than the Johnson clan. My father's mother and Uncle John's mother were sisters, and that's how we were part of the Johnson clan. Both girls were Johnson girls. My dad was not very fond of California. Though he earned a lot higher salary in California, his heart always belonged to Oklahoma. I know he was seeing this as a great opportunity to go back home. Though my mother was from Arkansas, she had grown very fond of California. She was not as excited about the moving to Oklahoma as my dad was, but she didn't put up any great fuss about the move either. We kids didn't learn about the possibility of moving to Oklahoma until April, possibly even later that year. Mom and Dad knew that we children would have preferred to stay in California. I don't think they realized how hard it is to make new friends when you were still in school. My mother had always lived in only one place her whole childhood. That place was Ozark, Arkansas. Both her mother and her father were born in Ozark, She and all her siblings were born there as well. When Mom was 14 years old, her mother died, and a year later, her father died. My mother became an orphan, and she lived with her Aunt Dovey and Uncle Argus. I met Uncle Argus and Aunt Dovey several times. I thought they were very nice people, and I liked them. I learned later that they were the quintessential hillbillies. My Uncle Argus raised and gambled on fighting chickens, perhaps I should say fighting roosters. As far as I know, that was the only job that Uncle Argus ever had. My Aunt Dovey stayed at home and sometimes took laundry in from other folks from the community. This old couple didn't have a lot, but they truly knew how to love each other and other folks as well. They were truly overjoyed when they had visitors like my family and me. When we pulled up, Uncle Argus came bounding out of the house with such excitement that it was kind of scary. His enthusiasm could not be matched. The house was on a family plot of land, and so there was almost no expense involved in living where they lived. They did gardening and lived off the bounty of the land for the most part. Most of their cash came from winnings in the fighting rooster trade that Uncle Argus engaged in. They were the happiest old couple I had ever seen, and they spent a great deal of time together. That would have a great influence on me later in life. Uncle Argus also loved his roosters. Each rooster had a little bungalow that was about a little bungalow that was about 2 feet deep with a hip roof made of old tin. And they looked like little A-frame houses. They had little ropes that went around the feet and attached the to the bungalows, and each was just out of reach from his neighbor. When you look out from the kitchen window at it looked like a very small community just outside of the backyard. But Uncle Argus warned us not to get close to the roosters because they would flog you with the spikes that stuck out like great talons on all of the rooster's legs. When Mom graduated from high school, she moved to Muskogee, Oklahoma, and became a telephone operator. That's where my dad met her. In fact, they were married in Muskogee, Oklahoma. Both my big sister Betty and I were born in Muskogee, but that detail is for another story. My dad lived and grew up in a place called Atoka, Oklahoma. The name of the community where he was born was called Hungry Mountain, which is near Tahlequah, Oklahoma. His mother passed away when he was 13 years old. He lived there with his father for a little while. Dad had took a family farm, or his dad had taken a family farm in Atoka and raised crops and opened a small country store where they lived until the onset of World War II. When the war broke out, my Uncle Luster, Dad's big brother, joined the Army to help fight. Within a few months, my dad joined the Navy. After boot camp, he was stationed on a ship called the USS St. Louis. That is where he spent much of World War II. He fought in battles all over the Pacific Ocean. When he was discharged after the war, he stayed in California for a few months with a friend from the Navy. Soon he became homesick for Oklahoma, and he and my Uncle John rented an apartment together in Muskogee. They lived in Muskogee, Oklahoma, the third largest town in the state of Oklahoma at that time. By that time, Helen, Mom's sister, had come to live with her in Muskogee as well. Uncle John began dating Aunt Helen, and he introduced Dad to my mother. And that is where the Jones clan that I'm a part of had its beginning. This is just a little background information for you. Dad had spoken with Uncle John's banker concerning the farm. He made arrangements to purchase the property. It was located on top of a place called Workman's Mountain near Stillwell, Oklahoma. The property formed part of the border between Oklahoma and Arkansas, and there were concrete markers placed along on the state line in places on that property. This place was at the end of the road and at the end of the electric wire. It was a very rugged country at that time. The house itself was wired for electric and had power. It was one of those houses that come in kit forms and had been built for Uncle John and his family. After they built Uncle John's house, the bank increased the payment until it became out of reach for him. That's how Uncle John came to lose his property, because the terms of the agreement changed when the house was built to completion. The payment had become so high they could no longer afford it. He offered Dad the chance to redeem the property. So when summer came and school was out in Modesto, we loaded up Dad's truck and a very large trailer and took Mom's car with a smaller trailer and moved to Oklahoma. In my opinion, we looked like the grapes of wrath in reverse. We kids all missed our friends in California, but the wild country where the house was excited me. I was 16 when school started that fall and had already acquired my driver's license. I took the money I saved working that summer and got a 1953 Chevy car. It wasn't much to look at, but it was the pride of my personal belongings. I love that old car. The old Chevy had a six-cylinder engine with a cracked block that had been welded as a repair. The engine block still leaked water just a little bit, so I had to keep a close check on the radiator. But the leak was small enough that it did not keep me from driving the car. I saved, oh, let's see, I saved and scrimped and used every penny that I could put together to buy the car, which was a whopping $50 by the time summer was over. I had saved another $100 to buy gas through the next school year. Let's see, come here. Come here. My dog has brought a pop can in and likes to hear it rattle. Excuse me for just a second, I'll be back and we'll get this fixed up. There you go. I'm sorry about that. Let's get back to the story. It was an old pop can she'd found someplace, and I have no idea where. Oh, this old car wasn't much to look at. It was a faded two-tone blue, light over dark, and it was so faded you could barely tell where the two tones met. It didn't have a radio, and it didn't have an air conditioner, The seat covers were made of that coarse plastic woven material that was so popular in the late 50s. There were different tones of blue, or they were different tones of blue in the seat covers, so they kind of matched the car color. They were also faded. So I don't know if you remember, but that kind of seat cover, uh, as it wears out, allows small strands of plastic to break and to snag on every bit of clothing that you wear as you rub across it. This kind of plastic also generates a very high static charge when you slide over it. So every time you grab the door handle, you received a great electric shock. The arc sometimes stretched about an inch long, and it could make a little boy squeal. The car was a two-door sedan, and the seats folded forward on each side to let passengers into the back. The passenger seat in my car had broken at the hinge on the outside, and if it was moved at all, it would fall apart, and the back of the passenger's side would lie down on the back seat itself. But oh, how I loved that old car. I earned the money to buy the car by washing semis and their trailers down at the cannery where my father worked. On a good weekend after school, I would wash one or two trucks for gas money. I knew that would keep me going at least until it got cold enough that the water would freeze. And this not only, I'm sorry, and this not being able, or thus not being able to wash the trucks because the water froze. I saved a little money, not much, and was very frugal with what I had in hopes that it would last a while. As time rolled around for school to start, I thought about how difficult it would be to start this school as a new student. The hierarchy would have to be established, and I would be put in my place. I became more nervous because so often in new schools, the young men like to establish dominance, especially when a new kid starts. That usually meant two or maybe three fights before you were finally left alone. I knew this because I had gone to many new schools in my life. I expected the same to happen here. As I began school in Stillwell, one of the reasons I expected to have to defend myself was because of the way I dressed. It was so different from everybody else. I knew it was so different from everybody else I knew there in Oklahoma. In California, I ran a small lawnmower service, and I used the proceeds to buy my clothes for school. Mom wanted to buy me jeans and plaid shirts and cowboy boots, which would have made me a laughing stock at Modesto High School. I tried to dress like just like everyone else at Modesto High School, and that was to look as close as possible to what the Beatles looked like because they were popular at that time. When they started, if you remember their clothes, it changed as they became more popular. My regular school day apparel included a pastel shirt in yellow or blue or orange or gray, and even white with button down collars. I also wore skinny tie and a wildly colored vest as a part, and a pair of sharp toed beetle boots that zipped up the side. My pants were very tight slacks I had some slacks that had zippers on the inside seam of the leg at the bottom, so your foot could slip through and then zip back up. I think about it now, and I can't imagine how uncomfortable that would have been. But we all look good in our own eyes. Styles change often, and we were compelled to be current. Yes, we young men were just as fashion conscious as the young women were. When I was 16, I didn't even own a pair of blue jeans, let alone a pair of cowboy boots or plaid shirt. And it had been a long time since I'd even seen a plaid shirt before we came back to Oklahoma. The day I started school was a very exciting time for me. Most of the girls were impressed that I was willing to dress so formally just to come to school. I think they may have thought I was trying to impress them. The truth is, this is all I had to wear. Now, as flattering as it was to have all these young girls flirt with me, it was just as nerve wracking to see all the young men make those faces that gave me pause to wonder what was behind their grimace. None of these young men made any disparaging remarks to me on that first day. After all, they were young Okie men, and it is not in their nature to start trouble. However, I could tell they were not happy with the way the young women responded to me and the way I dressed. I was really quite shy when I was young, and I had never had young women come up and introduce themselves to me and ask me questions about who I was. So this was a new experience for me. I believe I rather enjoyed it. But there's a flip side to every wonderful thing in life, and it was the reaction of those who may not understand you. So I say, if you will brace yourself. I had attended school for just about a week when when another young man had his first day at Stillwell High School. He caught my attention right away because he dressed very much like I did. He had come there from Colorado. He also had hair that hung over his ears, unlike the boys there. He dressed in what those folks called Sunday best, even as I did. The young ladies also seemed to be very fond of him. They went to him and they introduced themselves and walked with him in the halls. They also asked him questions about who he was and where he was from. He seemed to really enjoy it just as I had. It really was nice to be a point of interest for all the young ladies. To tell you the truth, I don't think many young men would mind that at all. School started Tuesday, and he didn't start until the following Monday. Something about his father and him not being able to move before that time. His name was Stanley Lawley. Lexi, come here. Lexi, come here. Come here. Come here. She's trying to get stuff. I apologize. Be good, little girl. Be good. Yeah, be good. I'll get you a treat after a while. There we go. His name was Stanley Lawley, and Stanley's father ran a construction company that was building the new reservoir for the city of Stillwell. Stanley's father was no longer married to Stanley's mother, and it didn't take him long to develop a relationship with a very lovely waitress that worked at the Stillwell Cafe. Stanley and his father lived out of a trailer that was about 25 feet long and about 8 foot wide. The city of Stillwell had prepared a parking place for his trailer just off the main drag near downtown. That's about 2 blocks from my high school. Stanley and I met during the second week of school, and we hit it off perfectly well. Stanley had also just turned 16. He didn't have his driver's license yet. Because I had my driver's license and I had a car, he and I went everywhere together. If you could see one of us, you would see the other, or at least he would be nearby. We rarely, we really were like two peas in a pod. I liked Stanley partly because his dad gave him a big allowance, so we always had money to spend on gas or pop or even firecrackers. Stanley liked me very much or very well because I had a car that gave us independence. Stanley and I were all over the country, learning every back road and every alley and every point of interest that a 16-year-old girl or boy might find. Within a couple of weeks, Stanley had found himself a girlfriend. I didn't care too much for her. I thought she was kind of bossy. Since Stanley bought my gas, I didn't have to worry about my fuel or my savings. I drove the car to school every day. I would come by Stanley's house about 7:30 in the morning and pick Stanley up, and we would drive to school together. After Stanley got a girlfriend, she went with us everywhere we went. When I would come by his trailer in the morning to pick Stanley up for school, she would be there. Sometimes a little rough around the edges, I might say. I knew what was going on, but I simply couldn't do that myself, even though I envied him just a little bit. There's always a price to pay when you're an outsider and you upset the apple cart that the insiders use. And it's true enough that Stanley had a wandering eye and it upset his girlfriend. This seemed to come as a great surprise to Stanley because he took to heart the interest that all the young girls had shown in him. On the day that they broke up, Stanley skipped school and stayed home, claiming to be sick. But I went on to school as usual, and I parked my car on the north side of the school on Fifth Avenue. I was at the opposite end of the school when Stanley's girlfriend walked up to me and asked me where Stanley was. I told her Stanley was sick and at home as far as I knew. She declared that Stanley had been seeing another girl and it upset her terribly. With those words, she took her cup, which contained 16 ounces of Pepsi, and splashed it into my face. I was confounded as to why she would treat me this way because I had not said or done anything that should have caused her to be so upset with me. Nevertheless, I was the focus of her anger, but not hers only. Her cousin always attended school with her, and he was a big, burly farmhand, probably 16 years old as well. He spent his whole life growing up and working on a farm and had muscles where I could only imagine that muscles could be. He was someplace close by when she had thrown the pop into my face, and he surmised that I had behaved in some uncivilized way toward his cousin. This, in fact, angered him to the point that he followed me into the gym and to the bathroom where I was washing the sticky pop off my face and hands and wiping my clothes. He stepped up behind me and he informed me that he was going to tie a knot in my tail, whatever that meant. I didn't know what it meant, but I could understand by the look on his face better than his words he relayed. I really didn't want to fight him because of his size and evident strength. Now, we have two 16-year-old boys standing face to face and toe to toe in the gymnasium bathroom. It couldn't have been more than 10 seconds when the bathroom had become full to capacity with onlookers. Still, not a blow had been thrown yet. I've been in many fights from all over different schools. I've attended, and I could tell this might have been his very first real fight by the expression on his face. I had seen that expression before that said I might have gone too far. So now it becomes a matter of saving face for this young man and myself because everyone thought he had called me out to battle over some point of honor. I considered the situation calmly and I said to him that we could continue with this on school grounds, or we couldn't continue with this on school grounds, that if he would like, we could meet at the rodeo grounds at 4 o'clock that afternoon. This gave me time to de escalate the situation and for me to muster the courage that I would need to face such a powerful opponent. This calmed the crowd as well, and they soon dispersed. It also left me to finish cleaning up the pop from my face and my clothes. Stanley's girlfriend met me in the hall right after lunch and apologized for having thrown pop in my face. She realized I had nothing to do with what was going on between her and Stanley. I asked her to remind her cousin that I had done nothing that warranted his anger, and she promised she would. I never met him after school at 4 o'clock that afternoon, and don't know if the whole school met there that afternoon or not. I had heard that many had went and were disappointed. He and I became friends after that day. I went to pick Stanley up the next morning for school and asked him what was going on. Stanley informed me that his girlfriend had caught him in bed with some other girl that morning. That's what had caused the entire ruckus. I asked him to be more careful with his girlfriends next time so that I didn't get caught in the crossfire. I found out later that he behaved just like his father behaved with the opposite sex. Stanley and I were still very good friends, and we told each other everything, both good and bad. It seemed Stanley was having difficulty with his father because his father was having difficulty with his girlfriend. Stanley and I liked his father, liked his father's girlfriend, I'm sorry, and we would go visit her at her house. We sometimes hung out there for an hour or two. She was very pretty and a very nice lady. Because of the difficulties Stanley was having with his father, they began to argue more frequently. They became more animated as they argued. I could see the strain it was taking on Stanley. He talked often of how he wished his mother had not passed away. He had no one else that he could stay with if he was not staying with his father. I think that's where it came to his mind that he would like to run away. But like me, he would not want to go by himself. One Friday, he broached the subject with me, and we talked and giggled and laughed about it for the rest of the afternoon. I knew he was not happy, but I didn't think he would really want to run away. I had talked about it myself before, and I never ran away. As we talked about it, he suggested that we could go to my big sister Betty's house. She lived in California with her husband. I said, yes, I love my big sister Betty and miss her. She loves me, and I'm sure she would let me stay with her and her husband while we get jobs and an apartment. I never contacted my sister and asked her if I could come and stay with her. I never really thought we were going to do anything. You see, Stanley and I were coming at this from two different directions. To me, it was just a fantasy, but not to him. It was rock solid plans to Stanley. When I think back on this, we didn't know each other as well as we thought we did, or I would not have become entangled. About 2 weeks later, I came to school and parked my car on the north side of the building, just like I'd always done. But before I got out of the car, Stanley came out of the building and sat in the car with me. It seems he had a big fight with his father last night, and he decided that this was the day we were going to head to California. I thought about it for just a minute and I said, okay, let's go. So I turned the car off, and when I got out, I locked my door and asked him to lock his door when he got out. He yelled at me to get back in the car because he planned that we would take this car and drive to California. This surprised me very much. I knew my car had a cracked block, and such a trip might be the end of my car. I explained to Stanley that I would not take my car and drive to California, but if he still wanted to go, we could hitchhike. Stanley's face shows his great disappointment, but he was determined to leave his father behind. I, on the other hand, had decided this would be a great adventure, and it sounded like fun to me. I didn't take any consideration that this was late October and the weather could change at the drop of a hat. It was a little cold that morning, so we both had on our trench coats. I only had $2 and some change in cash, and Stanley had about $65 on him. I set my school books in the car back seat and gathered whatever supplies already in the car that I thought we might need for the trip to California. I asked Stanley to lock his door when he got out of the car so that it would not be disturbed while I was gone. I hadn't given any consideration to the consequences of this action. I didn't think about how it would affect my mother or my father or siblings. All I seen ahead of me was a great adventure that would take me to see my big sister again because I missed her terribly. I told Stanley that we ought to take the back streets and head west to Muskogee and in Oklahoma City take Highway 66 all the way to California. I had been on the route many times and I knew it quite well. Stanley answered with a absolutely not. It seems he worried that his father might see us and catch us before we got out of the state. And being as wise as we were at 16 years old, we decided to go straight north until we came to Kansas City. We would then turn west toward Colorado, then south to catch Highway 66 at Amarillo, Texas. While the rest of the story is about the part of the journey, that part of the journey, and it was the biggest mistake I had ever made in my short life, though it would not be the last. We started out on foot, walking north out of Stillwell. We had walked maybe 2 miles when an old farmer stopped and picked us up and hauled us about 15 miles north. We thought this was going to be a snap getting to California this way. We decided we would save much of our cash if we didn't have to buy gas. Our spirits were very high, and we were confident that within 2 days we would be at my sister's house. Well, we walked the next 12 miles, and with every step, our confidence slipped away. It had weakened to the point that I wasn't sure we should go be doing this. If I had acted then, it would not have been too late to undo what we had started. I had decided to say something to Stanley about turning around and going home at that time. Just at that moment, a car with a boy and his girlfriend stopped and picked us up. They acted so in love that they hardly even noticed us. But they gave us a ride through Siloam Springs, Arkansas, and about 5 miles more into the country north of it. I felt a little better at that point and decided not to say anything. Then again, we started walking, and with heavy feet, we made another 4 miles. By this time, I was getting pretty tired. It was about 3 in the afternoon, and we were about 90 miles north of home. We had not eaten lunch yet. When we came to a small country store, we went inside and had them make us a couple of sandwiches each. We picked up 2 bottles of pop and headed back onto the road. We devoured the sandwiches like the hungry teenagers we were, and by the time we had finished the sandwiches, we had finished the pops as well. We walked and had short rides over the next 15 miles until we crossed the border into Missouri. It was about an hour before nightfall when we caught our best ride of the day. It was an older fellow, a salesman, on his way back to Kansas City. He was also dressed in a trench coat, and I think he needed company to keep him awake for the trip. We thought how wonderful our luck was to have found a ride to take us that far, but not thinking ahead, we didn't come to understand that it would be 11 or 12 o'clock at night by the time we got there. It was nearly midnight when he stopped and let us off at the highway that headed west from just south of Kansas City. It was still in the country, and there was very little traffic to offer any hope. We were so exhausted from this very long day and started about 6 o'clock in the morning when we crawled out of our nice warm beds. We had gone without eating for about 8 hours, 8 or 9 hours by this time. We stood under the street light on the corner where these two highways met and waited with great anticipation for our next ride. By now it was getting very chilly outside. There was not a shelter to be had anywhere in sight. There was a light mist falling now, a little heavier than dew, and it chilled us to the bone even through our trench coats. In my head, I was running over all the things that I should have been saying to Stanley for having talked me into running away with him. I was cold and I was miserable. I wanted to be home. I wondered if my car was still okay where I left it. I think Stanley could see the frustration in my face as we stood out there under that street light about midnight on a cold and damp, deserted Missouri highway. Then he looked at me and said with a small voice, "You realize we have come about 400 miles today?" In my head, I thought I wished I could undo that and be back home tonight. I knew I had a soft, warm bed, but it waited for me in vain tonight. I answered Stanley, "That's a pretty long ways." Instead of saying what I really thought, we probably stood out there in the cold, damp night another 20 minutes, and then, and neither of us said another word. I think Stanley was just as miserable as I was, but he wasn't going to admit it either, because it was his idea to come on this trip. A Bob truck came by and stopped about 1:30 a.m., and Stanley reached up and opened the door. He was greeted with an old bearded driver who asked what we were doing out in the middle of such a terrible night and if we wanted a ride. Stan, Stanley made up some story about going to California where his sister was ill and would need his help. He said, "I came along as a friend to support him." He said, "Yes, we really want a ride and to get out of this weather." The old man was bright eyed and his beard was beginning to gray. It was well trimmed. He was friendly and kind hearted. He made us feel welcome as we climbed into the big truck. As we sat there, the old man shook his head in disbelief. I knew he did not believe the story we had told him, and in his kindness, he did not press the point. His face gave evidence of his many years upon the earth. His face always had a slight smile that spoke to his personality. He informed us he was going to Wichita, Kansas, and that he would take us that far. That was the end of a very long and very difficult day for both Stanley and me. It was not fun and it was not the great adventure I thought it would be. On the bright side, we were still alive and finally beginning to warm up just a little bit as we tried to grab a nap while the road while we rode toward Wichita. I'm afraid we were not much company for the old gentleman, if he had hoped for that when he picked us up, but I thought I recognized in his eyes a measure of sympathy for us as we stood out there in the middle of the night with mist falling about us. I thought to myself he must have found himself in a similar situation, hoping for a ride himself one cold night many years ago. I don't know what prompted him to stop for what surely looked like two hoodlums in the middle of the night, but I was really thankful. Never look a gift horse in the mouth, my grandpa used to say. As this Bob truck drove down the road, the sound of those big wheels humming a mournful whine, and the comfort of the warm air surrounding us, we would begin to drift off. That's when we began to dry and our clothes began to warm us once again. The chill was finally leaving our bones, and I felt myself beginning to drift into a welcome slumber. A quiet, peaceful feeling relaxed my body, and I felt myself slump as I escaped the knowledge of the day's difficulties through sleep. I was jarred awake by the screaming sound of air rushing out of a tiny pipe, which jerked me back to consciousness. As I responded in shock to the sudden sound, my recoil jerked my body to consciousness as well. I was immediately fully awake, and as I looked around, I found that we were in a large truck stop. I asked the driver where we were, and he replied, on the outskirts of Wichita, Kansas. Stanley was aroused with less gusto, but he awoke nonetheless. Stanley was sitting in the middle, and as he stretched and rubbed his eyes, he gave a big sigh. I knew that as he woke from sleep, he realized he was no longer at home in his own bed either. As he rubbed his eyes, he also asked where we were, and I told him. His response was, "Okay, that's good." He looked at our driver and thanked him for carrying us so far through this mournful night. I also thanked him. He told us which way to go as we got out of the truck so that we could continue the westward journey. The clock on his dash, the dash of his truck, said 4 a.m. As we crawled out of the warm safety and back into the nightmare, the very chilly air, I was jolted back to reality. The shock of it made me take a deep breath of that very cold air, and it seemed to rob me of all the comfort I had just enjoyed. The comfort and the peace that we had felt just moments ago had now been removed and seemed like a distant memory. We were faced with the harsh reality of what we had brought upon ourselves. We looked at each other and both pointed at the truck stop at the same time, and without saying a word, we began to walk that direction. We went inside the big, noisy, unfamiliar environment and straight to the restroom. We tried to wash the sleep out of our faces and our eyes without much success. We went to a booth and had 2 cups of hot chocolate. Neither of us had developed a taste for coffee yet. That newly introduced chill was beginning to leave our bodies as we sat there and sipped on our hot chocolate drink. It began to warm us from the inside out. We made a little small talk with each other, and then our conversation became more serious as we tried to address our plans. This would be our second day, and it would prove to be the longest of all the time we'd spent on the road. Just down the road from the truck stop was a newspaper printing company, and as we arrived, many drivers were leaving in all directions. We held up our thumbs in hopes that someone would give us a ride. As we stood there under a street lamp, the light revealed our disheveled appearance. As we stood there in hopes, a man maybe 10 years older than Stanley and I stopped to offer us a ride. We eagerly climbed aboard the van he was driving. He told us he could haul us as far as Dodge City, Kansas, where he was to deliver the newspapers he was carrying to another driver. This driver told us that he would talk to the next driver and get us a ride all the way over to Lamar, Colorado. We decided this was the kind of luck you only hear about other people having, because it was just too good a luck for us to have found. The driver was about 27 years old, and he asked us to call him Jack. And he enjoyed exchanging stories with us as we drove toward Dodge City. We would make a stop every once in a while, and Jack would leave a bundle of newspapers with someone. Stanley and I were eager to unload the papers so that Jack would not be sorry he had given us a ride. We didn't mind helping because it broke up the monotony of the trip as well. Jack said he had a wife and they had just had their first child. He said he enjoyed the whole experience and was overjoyed by his daughter. The pride in his eyes was easy to see. He also said he had a day job that started about 11 a.m. and ran till 7 p.m. He worked at a hospital as his day job, but they had to take the newspaper after the child was born because they had to meet their new debt obligations. He seemed very nice, and we enjoyed the time we had spent with Jack. He told us many stories about his daughter, and you could hear the pride in his voice as he told the stories. It made Stanley and myself both feel good and happy for him. He didn't even seem to mind all the hours that he had to work as he talked about his daughter. Jack told us about the other driver that went from Dodge City to Lamar, Colorado, carrying newspaper. He said that he was sure his friend Dave would give us a ride to Lamar. So as we made the last 15 miles to Dodge City, we were very quiet and just looking at the scenery out our windows. To our surprise, the old gentleman, Dave, that drove the next leg of the newspaper route had been replaced by a young woman. And when Jack approached her about giving us a ride to Colorado, she wanted no part of it. It looked like our streak of good luck had just run out. Jack gave us the bad news. He apologized and headed back to Wichita with an empty van. And I think I'm going to pick up here and continue when I do the next reading, because I think I got about 30 pages in there. But we will pick that up the next posting. And if you can't wait that long, you could go to my web page, and it's got links that will take you where you can buy this book from Amazon, and you can read the rest of that before I get back to you. You can download the ebook and start reading it immediately. Uh, this is my Facebook author page. You can find out about the books I write and about me in both of these places. Uh, they also have links that'll take you to the Montgomery Public Library. They recorded one of my seminars I produce about telling people how to write and publish their own books. And if you've been thinking about that, go there and take a look at that. I have a book published that's called How to Publish Yourself.